Are we living in the end times? Is the world as we know it about to come to an end? Has the Bible revealed signs that will alert God's people that Jesus is about to return? Hello, I'm Ken McDaniel with the Springfield Christians, and I'm happy that you've chosen to join us for this episode of Bible Questions and Answers. This week's question comes from Amber of Springfield. After expressing that she's not familiar with the details of the Bible, she went on to say that lately she's hearing a lot of people say that we are now living in the end times and that all the turmoil in the world is a sign that the end is near. She then asked, "Is this true?" This is a great question, Amber, and one that many people are asking. Like Amber, you may have noticed the rise in concern that the end is drawing near. It is often the topic of religious discussion, and it permeates church pulpits and websites. First of all, there should be no doubt that there is going to be an end of time, a last day, and it is drawing near. But I believe there's a great deal of confusion on the matter, and many Bible verses have been wrongly used to try and prove that the end is upon us. For example, one website devoted to end-time teaching states in its opening comments, quote, "What you are about to discover in this site is amazing evidence that we in 2021 are living right in the end times of this world," unquote. To support this alarming statement, it goes on to claim that passages such as Daniel chapter 2 and Matthew 24 are being fulfilled right before our very eyes. This is just one of the countless websites making the same argument and sadly the same mistake. The mistake being made is taking passages out of their context and trying to apply them to events for which they were never intended. Since time will not allow us to cover all the passages that are used to try to prove that the end is upon us, we'll focus on the one that is most commonly used and supposedly gives the most detail concerning the signs of the last days. If you'd like to follow along in your Bible, you can be turning to or opening Matthew 24. This is the passage that is most widely used to prove that the signs of the end times are unfolding before us. But when we look at the passage in its context, it is clear that Jesus is speaking of an event that has nothing to do with our day and time. In this study, we will learn what event Jesus was speaking of, and we'll also learn what the Bible says about the signs of Jesus' return. For the benefit of those who might not be familiar with Matthew 24, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to read the chapter down to verse 42, and this will help us in our discussion. I'll be reading from the New King James Version. "Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, 'Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down.' Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?' Jesus answered and said to them, 'Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christ and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I've told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out, or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then two men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. To understand this passage correctly and to make proper application, we first need to consider the context. The immediate context begins in verse 1, where he says that Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. So they are in the temple and they're departing from it. They were there at the temple because it was Passover week. In fact, chapter 26 and verse 2 tells us that it's 2 days prior to the Passover that Jesus was arrested and crucified. So he's going into the temple in the daytime during that Passover week, and crowds are gathering around him and he's teaching them. And in the evening he's leaving the temple complex and he's going out for the night. So they've left the temple and the disciples are looking at the buildings, and they're drawing Jesus' attention to them because they were magnificent, the buildings were. They were wonderful. History tells us that the temple complex, that is the temple building and the building surrounded it, covered an area of 19 acres. And the building itself was made of what it was described as brilliant white stones that measured 37 feet long, 12 feet high, and 18 feet wide. The roof was made of gold, and it was said to have gleamed in the sunlight. The Talmud says, or described it, as one of the wonders of the world. So the disciples, along with all the Jews, they thought that it was a permanent fixture. This is the temple of Jehovah God, the God of the Bible. And it is magnificently and wonderfully made. Surely it will stand till the end of time. And so they're alarmed. The disciples are alarmed at Jesus' response. Notice again in verse 2, Matthew 24 and verse 2, it says, and Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, after saying that, Jesus is walking, he's traveling with his disciples out of Jerusalem, out from the temple. They go down into the Kidron Valley. The brook Kidron is between the city of Jerusalem, the temple, and the Mount of Olives. And they go up on the Mount of Olives, and so they're sitting on top of one hill. They're looking across the valley at the temple, in the temple complex. And so the disciples, they come to Jesus and they ask him because they've been alarmed by what he said. Verse 3, he says, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And so they want to know from Jesus, when is the temple going to be destroyed? Remember, he said not one stone is going to be left upon another that will not be thrown down. And so that's the question they're asking. When is this temple going to be destroyed? When is this complex going to be destroyed? What will be the signs that lead up to it and of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, obviously, Jesus had taught through his parables and his teachings that he was going to return again. It may be that the disciples thought that the temple would stay until the end of time, until the end of the universe. We don't really know exactly what they were thinking, but these were the questions that they asked, and so Jesus begins to answer them. The first thing Jesus tells them, we find it in verse 4, is don't let anyone deceive you. And he goes on to say that false Christ, that is, people claiming to be a savior of one type or another, they're going to arise and they're going to try to deceive people. He says, many are going to come in his name saying, I am the Christ. And then he says, you're also going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. And so as they are looking to what is going to lead up, what is going to show us that this temple is about to be destroyed, false Christ are going to arise. And also he says that there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. He says, but this is not the end yet. He said, this is just the beginning of sorrows. And then he goes on to say that nation is going to rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Now, I know that these passages are used to try to say that's what's going on in the world today. This is a fulfillment of the things that we're seeing before our eyes today. But we got to keep in mind the context. Jesus is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And so, because they were under Roman oppression, under Roman rule and being oppressed by the Romans, and they wanted freedom from that because they were God's people, God's nation. They began in AD 44 to rise up against the Roman government. And so there were skirmishes all around the region, and the people didn't have communication like we do today. They couldn't turn on their TV. They, of course, didn't have the internet or anything. And so news would trickle in from areas around them just when people would come by traveling by foot or by animal. And they would come and they would tell about this uprising in this area and this war and this fight going on over here. Then they would hear about another region in another area. Jesus said, these are signs that the end of the temple is coming upon you. He said also that there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. And so Josephus, a Jewish historian who was not a Christian, and others write about how that during that time leading up to, and what we're going to see is that the temple was ultimately destroyed in AD 70 by the Roman army. And so the years leading up to that, so Jesus is speaking this according to our calendars in AD 33, and the temple's not going to be destroyed until AD 70. And in the times leading up to that, there were a lot of wars in the region because they were rebelling against the Roman army. In fact, in AD 68, the Roman army came to fight against Jerusalem itself. But news came to them that the emperor had been assassinated, and so the general of the army, he goes back and he's made emperor. And then in AD 70, the spring of AD 70, he sends back his son Titus to siege the city of Jerusalem and to destroy it. So there was wars, there was rumors of wars, and ultimately there was the battle in Jerusalem that resulted in the destruction of the temple. Now in that, there was a tribulation. There was a great tribulation that occurred. As they sieged the city and no one could go in and out, no water could come in, no food could come in, people started dying, they started eating their infants, and wealthy people were swallowing their gold coins, and looters were going into homes and cutting people open to take out the gold. It was horrific. And Jesus said that there would not be a tribulation. There had not been one like it since time began, nor would there be one to equal it afterwards. And so it was indeed a great tribulation that they endured. And he tells them the ultimate sign that you will know that the end is upon you, the destruction of the temple and of the city of Jerusalem, is when you see, verse 15 of chapter 24, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation, that which was spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not to be, he says, then you flee. You get out of the city. You in Judea, you flee to the hills and pray that you're not pregnant. Pray that it not be in winter. Pray that it not be on the Sabbath. He's talking about a localized catastrophe. He's talking about a localized event, something that's going to be around Judea. And so when the Roman armies, they were a Gentile nation. The Jews were God's covenant people. They were God's supposed to be holy people. And they viewed all the other nations as unclean and unholy. And so here the Roman army is surrounding the city of Jerusalem. And Luke chapter 21 connects that abomination of desolation with the Roman army. Again, you can look that up in Luke chapter 21. That was the abomination, the unholy, the unclean nation that made desolation. Now, we're going to come back to that term desolation in just a moment. But they destroyed the city of Jerusalem and they destroyed the temple, and that all happened under the guidance of General Titus in AD 70. Now, to be certain that Jesus is talking about a localized event that occurred in AD 70, notice how he puts, if you will, a timestamp on it. In verse 32, he said, "Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place." So Jesus assured them that all these signs that he had given them, they weren't to be for generations far in the future. He says all these things are going to take place before this generation passes away. He's not talking about our generation, us being the readers of it. He's talking about those that were in his presence, those whose very ears heard the words that he was saying. He said it's all going to happen before this generation passes away. I know that we've moved through this passage rather quickly, and there's some things that we've not been able to discuss in detail, such as verses 29 through 31. And what we need to realize in those verses is Jesus is using what's called prophetic language. This language has been used in different Old Testament books, and it was talking about the destruction, God coming upon certain nations, certain kingdoms in judgment against them. And so this is the language that Jesus is using. But to help us to understand that further, I'd like to send you a document that's titled An Analysis of Matthew 24. It's written by my mentor and dear friend, L.A. Stouffer, and I will send it to you in PDF format. It's free of charge. I'm happy to share that with you. Just send an email to me personally, ken.mcdaniel@yahoo.com, and I'll get that to you. The last thing I would like for us to consider so that we come to a proper understanding of Matthew 24 is a transition that occurs between verses 34 and 36. Let's go back and read those together. Verse 34, "Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." So he says, this generation's not going to pass away till all these things happen, these signs occur, and it results in the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. He says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So there's going to be a day that there's going to be an event that's going to affect the whole world. The whole universe is going to pass away. But he's assuring them that that localized event that was going to result in the destruction of Jerusalem, in which he did not want any Christians to get caught up in, he wanted them to escape it before it happened so they'd not lose their lives. He says, you can be certain it's going to occur because my words are going to endure even after the universe is gone. Now, after saying heaven and earth will pass away, he says in verse 36, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. So the day that Jesus returns, that heaven and earth pass away, that time ceases to exist, he says, nobody knows when that day will be. Now let's read on. I'll read again verse 36, and we're going to read down through verse 44. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as the days were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. We can see the difference in the language here. Leading up to verse 34, those events that would happen within that generation, he refers to them in verse 19, verse 22, and verse 29. He refers to them as those days with signs that culminate in the destruction of the temple. But in verse 36, he speaks of another day, the day that heaven and earth will pass away. The day that Jesus returns, he says, nobody knows when that's going to be. So Jesus himself could not give the signs leading up to it because only the Father in heaven knew that day. Not even the angels of heaven knew that day. And so he says, it's going to be like the days of Noah. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were giving in marriage. And so for us today, or whatever generation it may be in, they may be headed to work. They may be lying down to go to bed. They may be mowing the yard. They may be washing the dishes. It's going to be a day just like any other day. It's like a thief coming in the night. The thief doesn't announce. The thief doesn't give signs as to when he's going to be coming. And so it's going to be with the second coming of Jesus, the day of judgment. He says, there's not any signs. It's going to come as a thief in the night. So we see the clear difference between the destruction of Jerusalem and the signs leading up to it and the day of Jesus' return. And so he continues on in verse 45, and he uses a series of 3 parables to explain that since we don't know when he is coming again, we need to always be prepared. We need to always be ready. He talks about a servant that his master goes away, and one servant may be found to continue working and to be faithful all the way up until the moment that his master returns, and he finds that servant faithfully busy in his service. But another servant says, my master's delaying and don't know when he's going to return, and he begins to beat his fellow servants and his maidservants. And so he tells that the one is going to be rewarded and the other is going to be punished. And then he spoke a parable about 10 virgins, which would have gone along with their marriage customs of the day. They would receive the bridegroom when they returned from the wedding, and they would light their lamps and light the way for the bridegroom to come. And so the bridegroom is late in coming, later than they thought, and 5 of the virgins, the maidens, they had brought enough oil just in case there was a delay. But 5 of them had not brought enough oil, and so they were not ready. Jesus is using that parable to show we need to be ready for his return. We need to be ready for the judgment day. And then he spoke a parable about another master, an owner who has servants, and he leaves talents. Now that word talents in Jesus' day did not mean talents as in abilities like we have today. It meant a sum of money. Now it is where we get our word talent from, meaning abilities, but back then it meant a sum of money. And so he left a larger sum with one servant, a smaller sum with another, and then a small servant with another. And the 2 first ones were found to be faithful and increased their master's money upon his return. But one servant was not faithful. He hid the money in the ground, and then he tried to just give that back to his master upon his return. And because that servant was not faithful and did not use the money to earn more, he said that the master was going to punish him. And he says, so it's going to be with those who are not prepared at Jesus' coming. And to be certain that in the second part of chapter 24 that he's speaking of his return, the second coming of Christ, the day of judgment, all of this culminates in what he says in chapter 25 and verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another as a shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. And so he clearly teaches that what he's talking about in verse 36 and following is the judgment day, when he comes in his glory with all of his holy angels, and then all the nations. That means every single person who's ever lived is going to be gathered before him, and they're going to be judged. So to answer Amber's question, are we living in the last days? That is Jesus about to return? We have no way of knowing. He's coming as a thief in the night, and he therefore warns us and encourages us to always be ready. Now, I'd like to invite you to come back, join us next Sunday. We're going to be talking about what will happen when Jesus returns. What's going to happen on the last day? It's amazing the things that the Bible tells us. And so, again, come back, be with us, tell your friends, tell your family about the program, and have them join us as well. But it's certain that Jesus wants us to be ready for the coming judgment day. Are you ready? If you'd like more information to help you prepare for Jesus' return, we'd like to offer to you one of our correspondence courses. These lessons will lead you through a study of how to have your sins forgiven, how to make sure that you've been washed in the blood of Jesus, and how to live a Christian life. If you would be interested in one of our small group studies on this very topic, just send us a text or an email message and let us know that you would like to join that group, and we'll give you the information of when one of those studies will begin and how you can join it. Also, I mentioned earlier in the program about a PDF file that I'm happy to share with you. It's titled An Analysis of Matthew 24, written by L.A. Stouffer. Just send me an email, ken.mcdaniel@yahoo.com, and I'll get that out to you. We also want to invite you to our worship service. We meet on Sundays at 9:30 for Bible study, and we're currently studying the book of Romans. And at 10:30, we meet for worship. This is simple New Testament worship. We observe the Lord's Supper each week, led by our members. We have congregational singing, led by our members. And then we have Bible-centered preaching. If this is what you're looking for, please join us, 1939 South Passfield, here in Springfield, Illinois. If you want to write to us, again, that address is 1939 South Passfield, Springfield, Illinois, 62704. Until next week, God bless.
How do you explain? How do you explain? How do you describe a love that goes from east to west, as deep as it is wide? You know all our hopes, you know all our fears, and words cannot express the love we long for you to hear. So listen to our hearts.